All right, so you've sent over a really fascinating collection of articles and excerpts and even some notes on a YouTube video. It's all about time and consciousness,
Yeah.
which, let's be honest, can feel a bit like wading into the deep end of a pool of abstract thought, right? Luckily, that's what we're here for. We're going to break it down together.
Yeah.
It seems like your source material stems from a conference called Time and Minds, hosted by this Professor Bernard Carr.
Okay.
And get this, it wasn't just a bunch of academics in one field. They had physicists, philosophers, even a neuroscientist who studies ayahuasca talk about a mix of perspectives.
And that's what makes this topic so fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
You have these different disciplines, often operating in their own separate bubbles, all converging on these fundamental questions of human experience.
Right.
What is time? What is the self? And how do they all connect?
Right, like everyone's looking at the same puzzle, but with completely different lenses.
Exactly. And what we're seeing is that those different perspectives might actually complement each other, offering unique pieces to help us understand this bigger picture of reality.
Okay, well, let's dive into those pieces. The first article you've got tackles Einstein's famous quote about the passage of time being a stubbornly persistent illusion. Is physics really saying that time as we experience it isn't real?
It's not that time isn't real, but rather that our perception of it as this linear flow from past to future might not be the whole story. Einstein's theory of relativity introduced this concept called the block universe. Imagine a loaf of bread, right? It exists as a whole, but we can only ever experience one slice at a time.
Okay.
The block universe suggests that past, present, and future are all just like slices of this larger loaf coexisting simultaneously.
So you're saying all the choices I'm about to make already exist in this block universe. That's both liberating and a bit scary to think about.
Exactly. It challenges our intuitive understanding of free will and choice, doesn't it? But it's important to remember that this is just a model, a way of understanding reality through the lens of physics.
Okay, that's where my brain starts to hurt a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But even if this block universe idea is accurate, it doesn't quite explain our personal experience of time, does it? I mean, time flying when we're having fun, dragging on when we're bored, that feels very real, even if it's not precise like a clock.
That's the crux of the debate between subjective and objective time.
Right.
Physicists often focus on objective time, what we measure with clocks and calendars.
Right.
It's consistent, measurable.
Yeah.
But our internal subjective experience of time is much more fluid and personal, influenced by a whole bunch of factors.
Okay.
Our emotions, our physical state, even things like our heartbeat.
Wait, our heartbeat. How does that play into it?
There's been fascinating research on this. Researchers found that by subtly altering someone's heartbeat, even just a little faster or slower, they could actually change that person's perception of how much time had passed.
That is so wild. Our sense of a second is more malleable than we think.
Exactly. This gets to the heart of why many researchers believe that understanding consciousness is key to unraveling the mysteries of time. Some physicists have even proposed that multiple dimensions of time might exist, and it's our consciousness that determines how we experience them.
Multiple dimensions of time. Okay, now we're going full-on science fiction. What does that even mean?
I know it sounds like something out of a movie,
Yeah.
but it's a concept that some physicists take quite seriously.
Okay.
One model proposed by this Professor Bernard Carr from your materials suggests that our consciousness might experience time as a higher dimension beyond our typical understanding of past, present, and future.
So I'm trying to wrap my head around this. We're experiencing one dimension of time, but our minds are somehow plugged into a higher dimension where time works differently. Is that kind of the idea?
You got it.
Yeah.
And this concept could potentially help explain some of those experiences that seem to defy our linear understanding of time. Things like precognition, mystical experiences, even those moments where you feel deeply connected to everything around you.
Like in the movie Interstellar, where they communicate across time through a higher dimension. Are we saying that's not just a cool cinematic trick, but potentially a glimpse into a larger reality?
It's definitely a mind-bending idea.
Oh.
While we can't say for sure if it's true, the idea of higher dimensions is a serious concept within theoretical physics.
Okay.
Whether it directly relates to these experiences, however, is still up for debate.
Okay, so we've gone from Einstein's block universe to the possibility of multiple dimensions of time. My brain is definitely doing backflips right now. But if our minds are entangled with time in these complex ways, it begs the question, what exactly is consciousness? Is it just our brains firing, or is there something more to it?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's a debate that's been raging for centuries.
Right.
Some firmly believe in the materialist view, where consciousness is simply a product of the brain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Neurons firing chemicals, reacting, that's it.
Right.
But then you have others who propose that consciousness might be something more fundamental, something that exists independently of the physical brain.
So are they saying our brains aren't creating consciousness, but are more like radios tuning into a consciousness that already exists out there?
That's one way to think about it. This concept is often referred to as idealism.
Okay.
And some proponents of this idea even suggest that consciousness might actually influence the fabric of reality itself.
Hold on, influence reality. How could that even be possible?
This delves into the strange world of quantum mechanics and the idea of a participatory universe.
Okay.
It's a complex concept, but essentially it proposes that observation might actually play a role in shaping the reality we observe.
So by observing something, we're kind of collapsing possibilities into the events we experience. Like our observation is a creative act in itself.
That's a simplified way of putting it. But essentially, yes. It's as if the very act of observing something influences the nature of what we're observing.
Wow.
This idea is still highly debated, but it's a fascinating concept to consider, isn't it?
That is seriously mind-blowing. Are we saying our minds could be shaping the universe around us?
It's a wild idea, right?
Huh.
And while it's still very much on the fringes of scientific thought, it's one that some very serious physicists and philosophers are exploring.
Wow, this is a lot to process. We've got the
Yeah.
block universe, multiple dimensions of time, precognition, the nature of consciousness itself. It's incredible. Sounds like this conference was a wild ride.
It was. And what's remarkable is that your source material isn't just theoretical discussions. You've got excerpts from that neuroscientist who studies ayahuasca, which brings a whole other dimension to this conversation, the experiential side of exploring these concepts.
Right. Ayahuasca, that's a psychedelic brew used in spiritual ceremonies in the Amazon, right? And it's known for inducing some pretty intense altered states of consciousness. Is this where we start getting into the more subjective personal experiences people have had that challenge our traditional understanding of time?
Exactly. You see, people who have taken ayahuasca often report profound mystical experiences, and a common thread in these experiences is a distorted or altered sense of time. Some feel like time stops completely. Others describe it as flowing in a nonlinear way. And along with these altered time experiences, there are often reports of a feeling of oneness with the universe, even encounters with otherworldly beings.
So are these experiences just hallucinations caused by the drug, or could they be glimpses into a larger reality that we're usually not privy to?
The million-dollar question. And honestly, there's no easy answer. It's a question that scientists and philosophers have been debating for decades with no definitive answer in sight.
Okay, so then what kind of insights did this neuroscientist offer about these ayahuasca experiences in the context of time and consciousness?
Well, one of the key takeaways was this idea that our everyday experience of reality might just be one very limited slice of a much larger multidimensional reality. And perhaps through certain practices, meditation, psychedelics, or even just shifts in our thinking, we might be able to access these other dimensions, gaining a brighter perspective on reality and our place within it.
So we're all multidimensional beings, but we're just not aware of it most of the time. That's a pretty mind-blowing concept.
It really is. And it seems like the more we learn about the universe, the stranger and more wondrous it becomes.
Yeah.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're just scratching the surface here.
I'm starting to see why they call it a deep dive. This is heavy stuff.
It is. But it's also incredibly fascinating, don't you think? To consider that our understanding of reality might be so limited that there could be entire dimensions of existence that we're completely oblivious to it makes you question everything you thought you knew.
It definitely does. Okay, so we've talked about the theoretical side of time and consciousness, and now we're touching on the experiential side with ayahuasca. You've also highlighted some material about this thing called the ego-death experience. What is that all about?
Ego death is a term used to describe a psychological experience where someone's sense of self, their ego, temporarily dissolves or fades away. It's often accompanied by a sense of unity or interconnectedness with everything around them, a feeling of complete dissolution of the boundaries between the self and the other.
So you lose your sense of individuality and feel like you're merging with something much, much larger than yourself.
Exactly. And it can be a very profound and transformative experience for some people, often shifting their entire perspective on life, the universe, and everything.
But how does this ego death thing tie back into this larger conversation about time and consciousness.
That's what makes this so interesting. Many people who report having ego-death experiences also describe a significant shift in their perception of time.
Hmm.
Some say time seems to stop altogether, while others describe it as feeling more fluid and less linear.
So it's like their experience of time is no longer bound by our everyday ego-driven perception?
Precisely. It's as if the ego, with its constant need to categorize and define its focus on me and my story, creates a rigid framework for our experience of time. When that framework crumbles, even temporarily, we're left with a more expansive, fluid sense of time and perhaps a glimpse into how time might be experienced without the filter of our individual egos.
That's a fascinating thought. It's like when we're caught up in our own little worlds, worried about the past, anxious about the future, time feels very linear and restrictive. But when we let go of that ego-driven perspective, even for a moment, we open ourselves up to a more expansive and interconnected experience of time, something beyond our typical understanding.
Exactly. And this isn't just a New Age concept.
Right.
The idea of ego death and its relationship to an altered perception of time has been reported across various cultures and spiritual traditions for centuries. It suggests that perhaps these experiences are tapping into something fundamental about the nature of reality and our place within it.
It's amazing how much we can learn from cultures that haven't lost touch with these ancient ways of knowing.
It really is remarkable, and it speaks to the universality of these experiences, that there's something deeper at play here than just cultural constructs or individual interpretations.
I'm starting to see what you said at the beginning about all these different disciplines, physics, philosophy, neuroscience, even the study of these ancient traditions, all converging on the same fundamental questions. It seems like they're all pointing towards a more expansive and interconnected understanding of reality with time and consciousness at the very heart of it.
Precisely. And that's what makes this such an exciting time to be alive. We're on the cusp of a major paradigm shift in our understanding of ourselves, and the universe and time and consciousness are at the very forefront of that shift.
It's both exhilarating and a little terrifying, to be honest. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive already: the block universe, multiple dimensions of time, the nature of consciousness, ego death, even the potential for psychedelics to expand our perception of reality. What a wild ride.
It has been quite a journey. But remember, this is just the beginning. There's so much more to explore and discover in the realm of time, consciousness, and the nature of reality itself. But we should probably pace ourselves.
Yeah.
There's a lot to take in all at once.
You're right. We don't want to overload anyone. But you've definitely piqued my curiosity even more. What else can you tell us about the Time and Minds conference and the ideas that were presented there? What other rabbit holes are we about to jump down?
Okay, so we're back, and my brain is still buzzing from all these incredible concepts we've established, that time and consciousness are deeply intertwined, but there's still so much to uncover. What else can you tell us about the Time and Minds conference and the ideas that were presented there? What other rabbit holes are we about to jump down?
Well, one name that kept popping up in your notes was Bernardo Kastrup. Did his work stand out to you at all?
Yeah, definitely. He's one of the speakers who seems to really challenge the way we typically think about reality.
Yeah.
You mentioned this term idealism in relation to his work, and we dig into that a bit more? Absolutely. Kastrup is a strong advocate for idealism, which essentially flips the script on how we usually perceive the world. Instead of seeing consciousness as a product of the physical world, idealism proposes that consciousness is the fundamental ground of reality, and everything we experience in the physical universe, our bodies, even time itself, arises from this underlying consciousness.
Okay, so it's like saying the universe isn't out there, independent of us, but it's more like a projection of our collective consciousness.
You got it. Imagine a dream. In a dream, you have characters, objects, a whole world that feels real while you're in it, but ultimately it's all generated by your mind. Kastrup suggests that the universe might be structured in a similar way, with consciousness as the dreamer, so to speak.
That's a pretty radical idea. I mean, it challenges everything we're taught about the world being this solid, objective thing that exists independently of us.
It does. But Kastrup isn't alone in this view. There's a growing movement of scientists and philosophers who are questioning the limitations of the materialist paradigm. The idea that matter is the fundamental stuff of reality. They're exploring these alternative ways of understanding reality that place consciousness at the forefront.
Well, I'm always up for expanding my mind. What else was interesting about Kastrup's presentation? What kind of arguments did he present to support these ideas?
One of the key points he made was about the difference between subjective and objective time, a theme we've touched upon already. He argues that while objective time, the kind we measure with clocks, is useful for navigating the physical world, it doesn't capture the full richness of our lived experience of time.
So there's clock time, then there's mind time, which feels a lot less predictable and
Mm,
way more personal.
exactly. And Kastrup believes that our subjective experience of time, how we perceive and relate to it internally, is actually more fundamental than this objective external measure. He suggests that our subjective experience of time is directly linked to the nature of consciousness itself.
It makes sense to me. Time definitely doesn't feel like a straight line when you're engrossed in a good book or having a meaningful conversation. It's like time bends and stretches based on how we're experiencing it.
Precisely. That fluidity, that elasticity of our subjective time experience is something that Kastrup sees as a significant clue to the nature of time itself. He suggests that it points towards a reality where time isn't this rigid linear progression, but something much more flexible and interconnected, much like our consciousness.
Okay, that's fascinating. But we also touched on those physicists who are exploring the idea of multiple dimensions of time. How does Kastrup's idealism, his emphasis on consciousness, fit in with these more physics-based theories?
That's where things get really interesting. Kastrup actually doesn't interpret those higher dimensions of time in the same way that some physicists do. He doesn't necessarily see them as distinct physical dimensions, but rather as metaphors for different levels of consciousness.
So instead of being literal physical places, these higher dimensions are more like different levels of awareness or understanding.
Exactly. He believes that as our consciousness expands through meditation, spiritual practice, or even just a shift in perspective, we gain access to a broader, more interconnected experience of reality. He suggests these higher dimensions of time might be a way to represent that expanded awareness, those different levels of perception.
That's a really cool way of bridging the gap between a more mystical or spiritual perspective and the hard science of physics. So it's like these higher dimensions aren't necessarily places we go to, but rather different ways of experiencing and understanding the reality we're already in.
Precisely. And this is where Kastrup's idealism becomes really intriguing. It attempts to build a bridge between those seemingly disparate realms, the mind-bending theories of physics, and the profound, often inexplicable experiences that people report from altered states of consciousness,
Yeah.
mystical experiences, and spiritual traditions.
So we've got Kastrup's idealism, which says that consciousness is fundamental. We've got those physicists exploring the possibility of multiple dimensions of time. There seems to be some overlap between these ideas, but also some pretty distinct differences in their interpretations.
You're right, there are definitely nuances, and that's why it's so important to approach these discussions with an open mind, to really try to understand the underlying principles of these different theories and how they might fit together, or perhaps challenge each other to give us a richer understanding of the big picture.
Well, I'm definitely trying to keep up. One thing that keeps coming up in these notes from various speakers and researchers is this idea that time itself might not actually be fundamental, that it might be an emergent property of something else entirely. What's that all about?
That's a question that's causing quite a stir in the world of physics. You see, for a long time has been considered a fundamental aspect of the universe, a basic building block of reality. But some modern theories, particularly in the realm of quantum gravity, are challenging that assumption.
Okay, so what could be more fundamental than time? What could time possibly emerge from?
That's the million-dollar question. It's a bit like trying to imagine a world without up or down. It's so ingrained in our experience of reality that it's hard to even fathom. But one possibility is that time emerges from the interactions between quantum particles, those tiny bits of energy that make up everything around us.
So it's like at the smallest level of reality, time as we know it might not exist at all. And then as these particles interact and form larger structures, time emerges as a property of those interactions.
Exactly. It's like time is a side effect of complexity, something that arises as systems become more intricate and interconnected. And it's not just about quantum particles. Some researchers believe that time might emerge from the structure of space-time itself, the very fabric of reality.
Hold on, are they saying space-time itself is more complex than we realize? That it's not this static, unchanging background, but something more dynamic and potentially even flexible?
That's what some of the latest research suggests. The idea is that space-time at its most fundamental level might be more like a fluid, constantly changing and evolving, and time as we experience it could be a consequence of that fluidity, a way of making sense of this constantly shifting landscape of reality.
Okay, now we're really getting into mind-bending territory. But it's also incredibly exciting to think that we might be on the verge of completely rewriting our understanding of time if time isn't truly fundamental, if it's something that emerges from a deeper level of reality. What does that mean for our place in the universe? Could we ever hope to influence it, to manipulate it, or even travel through it?
Those are questions that have captivated humanity for centuries, haven't they? Time travel, the ultimate frontier.
Right. It's the stuff of science fiction, but like you said earlier, what seems impossible today might be commonplace tomorrow. So are there any theories out there about how time travel might actually be possible?
Well, one of the most popular ideas involves the concept of wormholes. Imagine folding a piece of paper in half and poking a hole through it. That hole becomes a shortcut between two distant points on the paper. Wormholes are thought to be similar shortcuts through the fabric of space-time, potentially connecting different points in time as well as space.
So like tunnels through reality itself. And if
Mhm.
we could find or create one of these wormholes, we could theoretically travel through it to a different point in time.
Exactly. Now, creating or even finding a wormhole is something that's still firmly in the realm of theoretical physics. We, we haven't even observed one directly yet, let alone figured out how to create our own. And then there are the paradoxes to consider.
Paradoxes, like what?
Well, this is the classic grandfather paradox. If you could travel back in time and accidentally prevent your grandparents from ever meeting, would you cease to exist?
Hmm.
Or would it create a split in the timeline, a branching off into a new alternate reality?
Okay, multiple timelines. Now we're really going down the rabbit hole. But it's a fascinating thought experiment, isn't it? If our choices create ripples through time, what are the implications of being able to directly influence the past or future?
It's a question that philosophers and science fiction writers have grappled with for generations. And while we're a long way from having any definitive answers, exploring these possibilities can challenge our assumptions about the nature of reality and our place within it.
It's definitely a lot to wrap your head around, but before we get too lost in the complexities of wormholes and time travel, there was one more thing you highlighted in my notes that I'm really curious to explore further: precognitive dreams. Is there any scientific basis to the idea that we can actually glimpse the future in our dreams? So we've been on this whirlwind tour of time and consciousness from the block universe to wormholes, and now we're diving into the realm of dreams. Is there any scientific basis to the idea that we can actually get glimpses of the future through our dreams? It all sounds a bit like something out of a movie.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But precognitive dreams, dreams that seem to predict future events, have been reported throughout history. And while it's easy to dismiss them as mere coincidence or tricks of the mind, there's a growing body of evidence suggesting there might be more to it than we realize.
Really? So it's like you have a dream and then something very similar to that dream actually happens. Are there any concrete examples of this?
There are actually quite a few well-documented cases. One often cited example is the story of Abraham Lincoln, who reportedly told friends about a vivid dream he had where he was assassinated. Sadly, just a few days later, his dream became a tragic reality.
Wow, that sends chills down my spine. But how could our dreams possibly tap into future events? What are the potential explanations for this?
That's the million-dollar question. And like many things in this realm of time and consciousness, there are no definitive answers. But there are some really intriguing theories. One idea is that our minds, specifically our subconscious minds, are far more sensitive to subtle cues and patterns than we consciously realize. Our dreams might be a way for our subconscious to process this vast amount of information and, in some cases, anticipate future possibilities based on these subtle cues.
So it's like our brains are constantly gathering information even when we're not consciously aware of it, and sometimes that information bubbles up in our dreams as seemingly precognitive glimpses into the future.
Exactly. It's like our dreams become a screen to which our subconscious projects these potential futures based on the information it's picking up on.
That's a fascinating way of thinking about it. It kind of reframes precognitive dreams from something mystical to a function of our brains working in ways we don't fully understand. But what about those more far out explanations? You mentioned higher dimensions earlier. Could those play a role in precognitive dreams?
Some researchers believe so. If our minds can somehow access a dimension of time beyond our linear perception, as some interpretations of those higher dimensions suggest, then it's possible that precognitive dreams are glimpses into that more expansive realm of time where past, present, and future are not so clearly delineated.
So maybe our dreams are like windows into these other dimensions of time, offering glimpses of potential events that haven't yet solidified into our linear experience.
Exactly. It's a mind-bending idea, and certainly not without its skeptics, but it's one that many find compelling, especially when considering the anecdotal evidence and the sheer mystery surrounding consciousness itself.
It's definitely making me rethink the nature of dreams. So we've got
Thanks.
our brains potentially picking up on subtle cues. We've got the possibility of higher dimensions of time. Are there any other explanations for precognitive dreams?
Well, some researchers propose that precognitive dreams might be a form of extrasensory perception, or ESP. This gets into the realm of the paranormal. The idea that we might be able to perceive information beyond our five senses, including potentially information from other minds or even from a kind of collective unconscious.
So it's like our minds are tuning into a network of information, a sort of collective mind. And our dreams are one way we receive data from this network.
That's the basic idea behind some ESP theories.
Yeah.
Now, it's important to note that ESP is still a highly controversial subject within the scientific community. It's very difficult to design experiments that can definitively prove or disprove its existence, but the possibility, however remote, is definitely intriguing.
It is. It seems like every time we think we're getting a handle on time and consciousness, another rabbit hole opens up.
No.
So where does this leave us? We've explored so many mind-expanding concepts in this deep dive. We've talked about the illusions and the fluidity of time, the mysteries of consciousness, the potential for higher dimensions, even the very nature of reality itself. It's been an incredible journey. What are your final thoughts on all of this?
I think what's most important to remember is we're still at the very beginning of our understanding of these concepts. We're like explorers mapping out a vast, uncharted territory. And the more we learn, the more we realize how much more there is to discover. What we once considered impossible might turn out to be a fundamental aspect of the universe, and the questions we're grappling with about time consciousness and our place in the cosmos are not just abstract philosophical inquiries. They have the potential to reshape our understanding of ourselves and our world in profound ways.
I think that's a great place to leave it. This deep dive has definitely sparked my curiosity. I feel like I need to go back and reread all this material armed with these new perspectives and insights. Who knows what else we might find hiding in plain sight.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of it. The exploration never really ends. Every answer leads to more questions. Every discovery opens up new avenues of exploration. If this deep dive has ignited your curiosity, I encourage you to delve deeper, to keep questioning, to keep exploring. Who knows what amazing insights you might uncover along the way.